I think it is probably true that you and I do not tend to have the same idea of what is ultimately good for us as God. Would you agree with that? Can we humble ourselves enough to see that? We could look at children and we could understand that what my child thinks is for their good is often not really for their good. And we can be so arrogant as to think now as adult humans, my assumptions about what is for my ultimate good are always correct. May I suggest humbly to you, that's not the case. That's not the case. And specifically, it's not the case because you do not think in terms of eternity. So my children, they do not think in terms of years and decades. Right? They think in terms of moments. And so they ask me for a treat, and that's all they would eat if they could get away with it. It would just always be donuts and cake. And why is that? It's exactly because their perspective is only bound in by moments. It's just like what I want right now. And it's like, it's not what you're going to want 30 years from now. 30 years from now, you're not going to want to have the body of a person who has only eaten cake and donuts for their whole life. Right? And so the difference in our perspective is exactly the difference of how we can understand how time works. Like I can look further down the road than they can. Okay, now we could take that principle, we apply that now to how come I can't understand what God is doing in my life and how He is working out good in my life even though things are terrible in some ways. Because you think in terms of days and months and years and decades, and you do not think in terms of thousands and millions and billions of years. You don't think in the same terms and perspective that your Heavenly Father does. And secondly, you and I don't have the capacity to understand God's infinite wisdom. And why is that important? Because we can't figure out in our mind how to make blessing out of curse in this situation in our life. And then we think, because I can't figure out how that works, probably God can't figure that out either. Well, God is not as foolish as you and I are. God is not as perplexed by problems as we are. In fact, God is not foolish at all. And God is not perplexed at all. And so while you may be looking at your life and you're thinking that there's this suffering that I'm experiencing, and I can't make sense of how that could possibly work out for my good, that's okay. And I will not be the person to come give you a trite, shallow answer. I'll sit with you. And I'll weep with you if you're weeping. That's what the Bible tells us to do, right? It doesn't tell us to show up and give a bunch of answers all the time. It tells us to weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn and rejoice with those who rejoice. That's what the Bible tells us to do. So I'm not going to try to tell you what God exactly is doing, but I will exhort you to trust. Because you don't have fate. It's not fate that you're at the mercy of. It's your Heavenly Father.